Thanks for joining us this week, and welcome to Mutuality Matters, a podcast hosted by CBE International, where our mission is to promote the biblical message that God calls women and men of all cultures, races, and classes to share authority equally in service and leadership in the home, church, and world. Let's get into this week's episode.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Mutuality Matters podcast. My name is Todd Korpi.
And I am Tara Korpi.
And we are your hosts for the headship theme, where in this segment, we talk about what headship theology means and how it impacts how we live in the church, how we live in the world, and how we live in the family. So we're so excited today to be able to be joined by Amy and Rob Dixon. They are not only friends of the Mutuality Matters podcast, but their family. Rob hosts the segment, a different theme on this podcast if you follow us on a regular basis. That is side by side, women, men, and everyday mutuality. And so we're excited to be able to have them on the podcast to talk about their latest book, Penny Preaches. But before we get into that, I want to do just a couple brief introductions. So Amy is involved. She's an author or authoress of several books, including Maurice the Unbeastly, Sophie's Animal Parade, and Marathon Mouse. And she's also an editor and marketer in the publishing world as well. Rob has also wrote a book called Together in Ministry: Women and Men in Flourishing Partnerships. He's on staff at InterVarsity, and he teaches at Fresno Pacific University, as well as Fuller Theological Seminary. Whoop, whoop. I want to, Rob, you're actually the second Fuller person in a row that we've had on this podcast. And so I think eventually the CBE is going to think we're stacking the deck with Fuller voices, but there are worse things in the world. So, yeah. But yeah, they have together, they've recently come out with this new book, Penny Preaches, which we are excited to be able to talk about today. Rob and Amy, thank you and welcome to the headship theology theme of the Mutuality Matters podcast.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for the reminder that Amy she's actually 4 published books. I'm 1. She's ahead, is what I'm saying. And the kids always remind us, Mom published more books than Dad. So
I have 5.
5. Oh, yeah, with Penny,
just to correct you.
Yeah, thank you.
The facts need to be stated. Let's state the facts. We need to be honest about it.
Yeah.
It's amazing how kids act as the fuel to the little competitive fires that we have as parents, right?
True.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I'm excited to be able to talk about this book. Tara and I have talked a lot about, as parents of 3 girls ourselves, Tara, as a woman in ministry, and me as, a proud pastor's husband, and, having done ministry side by side, we see how this subject matter, addressing this within a children's book, is, first of all, so unique. I don't know if I've ever encountered a book like this, but then also the tremendous need for an edition of this conversation to be had at the children's level. And so let's get right into it. So Penny Preaches addresses the need for representation within children's literature. And so I'd love to hear what inspired you guys to write this book, and how do you hope it'll shape the perceptions of young children, young girls, and even young boys about the subject of women in ministry?
We never know who should go first with this question. Amy, you want to go, or you want me to?
Go ahead. You're good.
All right. Okay, so the origin story. A few years ago, I was in between writing assignments, and I was watching Amy write picture books, and I thought, how hard could this be? Honestly, I write, 60,000 word books. How hard could it be to write? Turns out, listeners, it's very hard. Every word matters in a way that it doesn't in a longer form kind of a book. But anyway, I started sort of practicing, figuring out what topics I could do. Amy gave me some coaching. I wrote a first pass. I took a deep breath and sent it to my editor, my wife, and said, "What do you think?" And she wrote back and said, "Here's some fixes." I tried my hand at the fixes, and then she finally said, I think the next pass was basically, "Let me just rewrite this."
I was trying to give an example. So I said, oh, I think we need to like develop this a little more, like maybe add some fun details. And so he tried it, and then it came back to me and I said, well, I sort of mean something like this.
Yeah.
And then I kind of rewrote a section of it. And he said, oh, this is so much better. Why don't we do this together? Because originally he had said, like, let's write this together. And in that moment, I didn't really have a vision for it. So I was like, well, why don't you kind of start and we'll kind of see where it goes from there. But it ended up being a collaborative process, and it was actually a lot of fun. And in some ways, a lot of fun to see him struggle with it, because it is, it's a shorter form and it seems like it would be really easy, but to tell a complete story that has depth and meaning and all of these things in 500 to 1,000 words, and even 1,000 is very long, considered very long these days, but to try to do that in a picture book and make it feel very satisfying after you've completed it, after you've read it, is really a difficult feat. So that's kind of what Rob learned in the process, but yeah, it was fun to do it together.
But to your point in your question, Todd, I mean, I think one of the impulses to write Penny, at least at the beginning and all the way through, was we have these. Part of my job is to have catalyze these conversations with like established churches and organizations and individuals, leaders who have been in the field for a long time, and I'm often find myself asking them to rethink their theology or their culture or their structure, whatever it is, to become more friendly to women. And so part of the thinking was, well, what if we shift that conversation and start earlier? Because then you may not have to change so much later, right? If you can start the conversation earlier. And so I think for Amy and I, this really is our hope, is that parents, grandparents, caregivers get a copy and read it with their kids, and it catalyzes conversations starting way back, and not, when someone's already kind of locked into a theological position or deep into like a structural kind of formation thing. So so we're trying to start the conversation earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in the story, it starts out with this young girl that, wants to preach a sermon, right? She feels called to preach. Share a little bit, because I had a heart to preach when I was, 12 years old. That's really when I really was like, I really just want to serve God in ministry. But there weren't a lot of examples out there for me to follow. So, I would literally get home from school and turn on TBN looking for a woman to pop up, because I just wanted to see if other women could do it and what it sounded like and how they preached. And so talk a little bit about the importance of representation for children, particularly young girls, to see this in positions of influence.
Yeah. I mean, I think we, similar to you guys, so we also have 3 strong independent daughters. We also have a son who I feel bad for sometimes, because in all of this press for Penny, we hardly ever talk about him. We always talk about, well, we have these 3 daughters. Yes, we have a son and 3 daughters. And, I think a lot of times when these leadership gifts start to emerge in young girls, they're often seen in a negative light. So, one daughter of ours in particular was always called bossy. Like, she is so bossy. And it's this negative thing that she has this inclination to lead. And I definitely, just looking at the comparison between our son and our daughters, that was not, our son was never called bossy. I think in general, boys are not really called bossy. It's almost like a gendered adjective. So for us, it was important to recognize, like, these are actually leadership gifts. Now, maybe they aren't coming out in the most healthy way, or they're not being received in the most healthy way, but it was important for us to help our kids figure out, where could they exercise these gifts? Where could they explore them more? And that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. If it was a preaching gift specifically, we would have been hard pressed to find a church where the leadership was something that our daughters could see and see women on the stage. So yeah, so it's very important. I mean, representation is so important, which
Yeah,
is why in the story, the one of the first things that her parents do when they recognize what's happening with Penny is they take her to a church where there is a woman who is preaching so that they can see that. Rob
right.
will have some things to add to this as well.
Just briefly, I mean, I think it's hard to be what you can't see, basically, right? So
Mhm.
it's hard to become something that you don't have modeled for you. Models really do matter, and so I think our hope with Penny is that, again, it's just one more sort of resource for the church to have, so that young girls and boys, but can understand that women can preach, women can lead. My joke recently has been maybe the sequels are like Lucy leads and Polly prophesies and Deborah directs. I don't know. We could keep going with some of that, right? But kind of this idea that like we want to give people the model that little girls can become preachers.
Love that.
I think the first time, anecdotally, the first time that really leapt out at me was with our middle daughter, who we adopted and who is half Black. And, our kids, like, any other girls, loved Disney princesses and were obsessed with, Frozen when that came out and all of that. But for Anna, our middle child, it was Moana. When Moana came out, it was like she was just obsessed. And even at a young age, she said, like, Moana, I look like Moana. I want to be Moana for Halloween, and it was just such an innocent, just blatant, explicit example of how having something to celebrate, having something to look to, even if it's something as simple as a Disney princess, really matters in the formation of young minds and helping them understand that that they too have a place in all of that. One of the things that I think is so brilliant about this book, and Tara and I have talked a lot about it, is the way that the plot line simultaneously uh, establishes this understanding in the reader's mind that a woman can preach, that a girl can follow the call of God and preach, while also tackling this thing that is often overlooked in our egalitarian environments, which is that there are barriers, even in egalitarian spaces. And so it also normalizes the reality of that without celebrating it, that there's a resistance there at first with the friends that she encounters. And I think that shows, or it demonstrates, kind of a broader need that we have to prepare young girls to simultaneously say, like, hey, you can follow the call of God on your life, but also with the reality that not everyone thinks that you can, and I think about when Tara and I were in Bible college. It was almost kind of this, we were in a Pentecostal school that's been ordaining, the tradition's been ordaining women for over a century. And so there was kind of almost this bubble of, celebrating women in ministry. And then we got out into the real world, into ministry, and realized, oh, there's a variety of opinions on this subject matter. And it was a bit of a disillusionment period early on in our ministry. So my
And
question
even,
is to,
and
well, go ahead.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but even in those circles of the people that maybe there was discrepancy in even the theology, they were graduates of the same institution that we were at. So it was very jarring, for us going into that. So go ahead, you can go to your question, Todd, but I just want to say that even in that, like, they were educated the same as we were. They were encouraged the same way we were, but they still had a different philosophy of what it looked like in the church.
So my question is, how can we, in the spirit of how Penny preaches handles the subject matter, how can we better prepare young girls for the obstacles that they may face in walking out the call of God on their lives, while also not discouraging them?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Amy, you want to go?
You're good. Go ahead.
All right. So, I mean, just one thought. Well, actually, let me back up. I was doing an interview yesterday for a forthcoming episode of Mutuality Matters, and I was talking to a woman who's an accomplished leader, and I asked a question about kind of her journey, and she could pinpoint the exact moment that someone first questioned her call. So just to affirm kind of what you both are talking about, right? That is alive, and it was almost like, I mean, she's processed a lot of that, I think, but it's almost like when she told it was like you could picture yourself right back there again, and that the scar of that kind of, right? So, I mean, one thought for me on this question is I think we start talking about the dynamics around gender in the church earlier. So age appropriate for sure, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure we're having this conversation when our kids were like 4, 5, or 6, but later, as they got older, it just became something we talked about. So it's something like this, right? Like there is a group of people in the church that don't think that women can preach, and our kids have grown up with women in their lives who exercise their gifts in all capacities. And so I would give an example, right? That some Auntie Lila can't preach, and here's, so we would talk about that, and then pretty quickly say, but there are other ways to think about the Bible passages involved. And then it becomes like a teaching moment and an opportunity to say, there are other legitimate ways of thinking about this, and here's how Mom and I think about this, and then to go from there, right? And if you have that conversation again and again and again, I think after a while it becomes normal for the kids to understand, A, that there are two sides to this thing, but B, that the egalitarian way of thinking about this is legitimate and is right, and they can stand on that securely, right? So I think it's about starting earlier than we might be inclined to, but then having those conversations and letting that snowball. And if you do that long enough and well enough, then I think you create a situation where a woman gets into the workforce, uses her gifts, and knows that people are going to have opposition, but also knows that there are viable ways forward for her theologically and otherwise. So I think, yeah, not rocket science, I guess, but starting the conversation earlier.
That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my, I think that in the normal course of growing up, I think all girls are going to encounter opposition. I mean, I even think in secular spaces, in church spaces, I think about our daughter Grace at one point wanted to, she was going to run for, student council. I think she was like in 4th grade. And one of the boys told her, well, I'm going to run for president because the boy has to be president, but you can run for vice president. And so she kind of came home like, wait a second, like, what is this? Like, what did I just, like, how did this person come to this? Like, why do they think that? And so then we start talking about how a woman has never been president. So I think there's just tons of natural opportunities to talk to girls. And unfortunately, I mean, I wish it wasn't that way, that girls weren't going to encounter this naturally in their life. But yeah, being open to communicate. Yeah, it was interesting. One of the reviews on our book said, this book is outdated. There's tons of women preachers. I don't even know why they wrote this. And yeah, I had that same reaction, like, if only right. That was true,
Oh my word, yeah.
Yeah, because I just think it's, as a woman, like you come up against it, not only in the church, but all over the place, as you grow up. So yeah, I would say just take those opportunities to really talk about it, and talk openly with your kids about it.
CBE International presents Women in Scripture and Mission. Hannah experienced abuse and shame because she could not bear a child, but Hannah turned to God and took steps towards healing, which transformed her life. God gifted her with a son, Samuel. Hannah's song is recorded in 1 Samuel 2. She celebrates both her personal experience and Israel's experience of God who rescues the poor, oppressed, and abused. Learn more at ministrywomen.org.
No, that's really good. I mean, and that kind of addresses a little bit of what my next question was, which was, how do you model this in your home? But you obviously have those conversations. So then let me ask this question for families that maybe this is a newer concept to them. Sometimes it's not that they've intentionally wanted to oppress women. It's just that they were not aware of the conversation. They didn't realize they needed to have intentional conversations. How do you encourage families that are wanting to embrace more of an egalitarian, lifestyle and home? How do you encourage them to start implementing that in their families and with their children?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so interesting is that what you said was sometimes you're not aware of the conversation. And a lot of that, we're all such products of how we grew up, right? And what we saw growing up. And sometimes and a lot of times you don't even think to question it for a while, So Rob and I in the home have always been really open to just evaluating, like, wait, why am I the one who is always cooking? We never talked about this, so
We've had that conversation too.
yeah, and
Yes, we have.
both Rob and I grew up, well, I'll let Rob talk for himself. I had a stay-at-home mom she had 7 children. So there were 7 of us in the house, and she did all the cooking and the homemaking, not based out of like a religious conviction at all, but that's just how she grew up. And so that's kind of how and we were Catholic, thus the 7 children, because she really believed in the no birth control thing. And so that was just how I grew up. And so in our home, it was like, okay, well, I guess I'll cook, even though we were both working. But being open to having those conversations and just looking at why you're doing the things you are, and kind of evaluating, like, is this working for us or is it really not working for us, has been really, really good. Like, just as an example, because we're talking about like the homemaking stuff, at some point we recognized Rob really has a gift for laundry.
A gift.
Yes. So, well, but what we realized is it's really like he's always thinking about the laundry and whether whether the laundry basket is full, and he's just really thinking about the laundry in a way that I just naturally am not. And so we said, it really makes sense for you to do the laundry. And so Rob is the laundry guy at our house. So yeah, I just think being open to conversations like that and evaluating, like, why are we doing things this way? Is just one small example, but Rob, I'm sure you have more to say.
Thanks for outing me and my passion for laundry. Appreciate that. So my next book about laundry. Anyway, I just one thing to add to that, which is I think if in the case that you described, Tara, like a family that wants to try something different, I think one place to start would be just try. Swap gender roles, swap the roles, right? Like try something different for a season, like do like a 3-month thing and then evaluate or something. Like I shake it up a little bit, I think. And in addition to the conversations that Amy's talking about, just try something and see what you experience in the midst of that. And you may find that you have a passion for laundry like I do, or maybe you're like, no, this would kill me to do this and let's negotiate something else, right? But I think trying something on might be a fun, I think it could be pretty entertaining, and even to bring the kids into that and like, hey, we're going to try to do some things a little differently over the next, 3 months or something. Might be fun to try that.
I love that, because that really like puts you into the eyes of the other person too. So it increases empathy, it increases awareness, it increases unity in the home, even, understanding that maybe something that somebody is doing that you don't think is a big deal when you're doing it feels like a big chore, or you may love it. You may absolutely love it and want to do it more, because Todd's our launderer in the house too. So he does the laundry too.
That's more because I work from home, not because I'm passionate about it. It's not a grace gift. However, I will say to that end, when we got married, I grew up in a home that was very pro women in ministry. My mom, preached and taught Sunday school, and my dad was happy, this 6'4" large Finnish man, stoic as the day is long, was happy to serve coffee to the people she was teaching Sunday school to. He was happy to be behind the scenes and kind of just champion her. But at home, it was very, my dad did the outside stuff, my mom did the inside stuff. So I grew up in this framework that was just normal, that we're pro women in ministry, but also The wife does all the inside stuff. And so when we first got married, I remember it was like 3 weeks, and I made some comment about like, why haven't you done my ironing? And there was just a cool breeze a cool draft that came through our house. But to that point, Rob, trying it out, which I did, I had to do. I realized not only can I iron my own clothes, but I actually prefer to, because I like the way I do it more, And so I'm the ironer in our home. I'm probably one of the few millennials left on earth that irons instead of, steams. But it's so true that reversing those roles allows us to kind of break up our perception of normal and then redefine what works best in the context of our own family unit. So on that vein, I want to follow up with kind of a personal question between the two of you who have led together in various capacities for years now. What have been some of the key practices that you have found helpful to champion one another's call, to live into that call? And what would you recommend as a couple that is wanting to support one another to walk out that call, whatever that looks like? What are some best practices that you would recommend to a couple that might be listening?
Yeah. Well, I'll start. I'll give it a couple shots, and then Amy can clean up. I think for one thing, and this is going to sound perhaps a bit trite, maybe even cheesy, but I think the goal for us has been to own each other's call, right? So I think often we think about calling as an individualistic thing. For sure God calls people to do things, right? But I think there can be a communal dimension to this idea of calling, and it's specifically in the marriage context. I think about it. I try to think about it like Amy's the pilot and maybe I'm the co-pilot. Like, so Amy's living out her call, but I want to be in the place where it happens, helping her move forward, right? And so I think sort of pressing into that idea of owning each other's call is really helpful when the rubber hits the road and things get challenging, right? So when you're working out schedule, travel, you're asking the other person to sacrifice something because you're going to some place or doing something because of your call. It's just really helpful when there's mutual ownership of each other's calls. And I think, so that feels like a place to start maybe. And then a second thing I'll offer is communication. I just don't think there's any way around it. You have to over communicate if you want to make life work. Now we have 4 kids and ministry lives and all of that. And so our life is pretty complex, and maybe other folks aren't quite as complex, but I think for really anyone that wants to affirm each other in their calling, it's just, there's no substitute for being able to talk about stuff. So Amy and I will do the monthly, we'll do every 3 months, monthly, definitely weekly, definitely daily, and then just in real time trying to sort out the schedule or what's happening or what the priorities are, things like that. So those 2 things for me.
That's good.
Yeah. I think too, like, we are able in our partnership, and really, I'm sure this goes for a lot of people, but you're able to see things as your partner is pursuing this vision, this mission, you're able to see things in a different way. So just as an example, at some point, Rob's been with InterVarsity for a really long time. But his job titles have changed and shifted and kind of moved over time. And he's a very he's like a helper, like a service oriented person. So a lot of times when someone needs something, he wants to step in and fill that need, right? Help the area do this, or help the regional team do this. And there are definitely times where I have to tell him, like, no, like you have to not do that, because this is not, like, in terms of living out the call on your life and your passion and all of these things that you're pursuing, this is going to pull you away from that in a way that's not going to be helpful overall for you. So I think with the communication piece, like being willing to be those eyes that kind of see in a different way and are able to speak to your partner and say, these are really great things, but it's okay to say no to great things, and to kind of stay on this path over here type thing. So I think just having that open communication, and as a partner, you have to also be able to receive that. Rob is great Rob's
most of the time.
He's great and humble and all of these things about
Graham too here. So hard to let go.
I'm pretty sure at one point I said, "Over my dead body, will you take that job?" And thankfully he came to see my way. But the reason was because I saw so clearly, like, this is you wanting to help someone or wanting to help a group, which is great, but it's really pulling you away from this other thing, which, I say to Rob all the time, like, he's so blessed, both of us are, to be able to make our passion our work, right? Not everyone gets to do that. And, I get to do that with my writing and publishing stuff, and he gets to do that with his job in taking on gender dynamics in the church. And that's just such a blessing that we get to do that. So we just try to help each other make sure that we're like staying on the path.
Yeah, that's so good. And it really speaks to like kind of the spirit that you have to walk in, leading together in an egalitarian way, where it's of humble heart and a humble mind, looking out for one another, that mutual submission, that we hear about. It's that loving one another, the way Christ loves the church kind of thing. So, that's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I hate to have to wrap this up, but we are out of time. And, we're just so thankful that you guys wrote this book. To all of those that are listening, if you haven't already, please pick it up. It is, that's backwards. There you go. It's Penny Preaches, and you can pick it up anywhere you can get books. You can get it on Amazon, right? Do you have a website that you guys want to promote or push? Anything? Just buy the book, look it up, buy the book. You can get it on Amazon. It's made by IVP, and we're just so blessed. Thank you for this investment and this work to help young girls see that they too can have a voice in the church, and it can be powerful and impactful. And thank you so much for joining us for Mutuality Matters. We can't wait to see you next time. And until then, have a great, great week.
Mutuality Matters podcast, along with thousands of CBE's other resources and content, is available for free on CBE's website, which is possible because of donor support. Together, we can spread the message that God calls women and men of all cultures, races, and classes to share authority equally in service and in leadership in the home, church, and world. Give today at cbe.today/donate.